2020 was going to pan out. At the end of last year, wellness was very much at the high on the agenda of businesses, but the juggernaut of COVID has pushed it right to the top, and it's impossible to have a conversation about the workplace without discussing it, as I'm sure everybody is aware. So within this group today, we've got speakers that represent all the elements of the workplace in terms of culture, comfort and design. And so what I'm going to do is go through and I'm going to introduce everybody so you know where they're all from and which businesses they work for, and then we'll go back to the beginning and everybody will give you their view on wellness in the work, the part that their company is playing in that, and their experience of COVID as well, and how it's affected their businesses and what they're doing to progress. And then we'll have time for questions at the end. So just to run through who we have here, we've got Catherine Kim, who is the Senior Design Director for Jones Lang LaSalle based in Hong Kong. We have Jill Parker, who is the CEO of BDG Architecture and Design, which is a global design business specialising in transformational change in the workplace. We have Adrian McGlenigan, who's a managing consultant at Human Scale, ergonomics and manufacture of excellent products. Richard Costin, who is the CEO of Business Office Furniture, who began very much as a steel storage company, but is now much, much more than that. And David Clements, Chief Executive of Future Designs, lighting manufacturers and designers. So I'm just going to go back now to Catherine. If you can hear me, Catherine, and everything's working.
Thanks, Emma. Yep, hear you very well.
Good. Please go ahead.
Okay. So just to give you a little bit of an introduction of what's happening in Hong Kong, I'll just start to tell you what the current situation is. So currently, we're actually in a third wave now in Hong Kong. Now, while there are some social and public restrictions obviously in place, Hong Kong actually never went through an official lockdown. The government obviously recommended people to work from home and practice the safe distancing. So what's actually happened is every different company adopted their own policy. So for example, some did go through a strict work from home policy. There are other companies who work on the team. So team A, team B, you alternate. With JLL, we are at work from home at the moment. Office is still open and we go in only if need, but of course that's not enforced. And we have all of the measurements in place in terms of temperature checks and ensuring that we're adhering to those rules as well. The thing about, I guess, the work from home, or what we're actually calling here is work from anywhere in Hong Kong, is compared to other areas like the UK and Australia, for example, apartments and homes are much larger. You have yards to go outside to get a little bit of respite. But in Hong Kong, the footprint is so much smaller. And so the average person does live in a smaller apartment, in a high rise. And so what we found is, because we are constantly keeping in touch with our employees, of course, making sure that they're doing okay, that they're feeling comfortable, the work from home policy is all going all right. There are quite a few staff members that feel very disrupted at home because especially the younger employees, they're living with their family. Here, sometimes it's not just the parents, but it's the grandparents living in a confined space. So they are going through that kind of disruption that perhaps a lot of people in the West, in the large areas, would not actually be going through. So that's why we're actually also calling it work from anywhere, and we're constantly keeping in touch with them to make sure that they're okay. But it is very different here. The home and that footprint in Hong Kong is very much different to the rest of the world. Now, moving on to sort of post-COVID impacts, I guess, in the workplace. As we all know, wellness, it's not a new thing. There are a lot of companies that have adopted that. But now I think it's actually become much more of a corporate responsibility. The way COVID has affected that is more the actual psychological impact and ensuring that employees feel that safety and well-being of actually going back to work. So the clients that we're currently working with, a lot of them are, for example, increasing the distance between workstations, ensuring that there's 2 meters in between that. increasing things like focus areas and smaller areas. So people do have that sort of distancing and more of a private space in the open plan to actually go to. And like a lot of clients think before a vaccine actually gets in place, they are going to actually keep to this level of design. And even after a vaccine, they're going to keep very stringent rules about how they actually clean the workplace as well. So in a way, I think this COVID impact will kind of last. It's definitely impacting the future of the workplace from here going forward. Now with JLL, we have also done some research, of course, like a lot of other companies have, in terms of key considerations for how we design the new workplace. We've defined that in 3 categories, such as physical, digital, and experiential. And to just give you some examples, if you're looking at the physical, it's things like reducing the physical density, which is pretty obvious there, alternating desks that are being occupied, making sure that you are actually working in teams, and even in looking at the materials and the finish selection. So making sure the materials are easily sanitized, it's not something that attracts a lot of dust and bacteria, for example. And also looking at even the healthcare industry, because their materials obviously have a different rating and performance level as what you would have in a typical commercial environment. Looking at the digital, there's the obvious one, obviously, is the air filtration system, but it's also moving towards a more touchless environment. So instead of using, for example, a keypad for security, going more into things like facial recognition. So really limiting as much contact with services as possible. And with the experiential, it's really all about just retaining that comfort and making people feel safe returning back to the workplace. There's obviously a lot more factors to be considered as well, but that's really to just give you a summary of the research that we have found here. And yeah, just to give you a bit of a picture of what's happening in Hong Kong. So over to you, Anna.
Excellent. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you. And we have...
Thanks, Catherine. So I'm CEO of BDG, and we're a creative transformation agency that specialises in the workplace. So as you can imagine, COVID has turned our world upside down really very quickly. But as we would say, we design for change. And so we're expecting to have quite a busy time, because there's one thing for certain about the workplace, is that it's definitely changing. So, and we work sort of across the 3 continents, and we have studios in London, New York, and Sao Paulo. So we're actually seeing how COVID is affecting the different continents, and we're also active in Asia as well. So as Catherine says, everybody's having a slightly different experience of it at any one time. So, and again, as Catherine said, wellness has been a topic for quite some time in the workplace, and it's been sort of gradually rising in importance, and the level of awareness of its importance is growing as well. But this COVID lockdown has really brought it to the front of everybody's minds. And you'll hear from others on this panel about lighting and comfort levels, intelligent buildings, etc., all of which contribute to the wellness factors of the building. And as workplace designers, we've been promoting the value of movement and ergonomics for many years. And as an industry, we've become very well versed in how we measure wellness and the factors that have to be considered in it. But I feel that the main ingredient of wellness, the thing that overrides everything else, is very often overlooked. But with now the focus on people and HR, it is coming to the fore again, and that's company culture, or how organizations treat their people. Because you can have the most intelligent building in the world and the most innovative working practices, but if the company culture is toxic, then these will count for nothing. So as we hopefully start to emerge from the global lockdown, and how individual businesses react to employees' needs is going to be the determining factor for wellness. As we all know, prior to lockdown, probably one of the topics most discussed in business, certainly in the West, was gender equality. But during lockdown, this has also been eclipsed has been eclipsed now by the BLM movement. So COVID, BLM, what that all says is that going forward, equality, diversity, and inclusivity will be at the forefront for all businesses and is going to have a meaningful impact. Put it in simpler terms, it's just about doing the right thing for people. It should be people first, and we should be future ready. It's kind of quite shocking to think that that there are organisations where people weren't the first consideration, and hopefully those organisations will be rethinking their approach. As we return to work, we're witnessing increased levels of anxiety about hygiene and health, and a real desire of people to stay working at home. One positive thing from lockdown has been the complete destruction of the myth held by many, many senior management right up to April 2020 that remote working didn't and couldn't work. And while some corporations have agile working, many more were still reluctant to believe in it. But then lockdown happened and the pendulum swung completely the opposite way. Probably too far, and I think the future will be a balance of office and home working, because it has to work for the employee and the employer. And those that get that balance right and build a culture of trust will be those that improve the well-being of their staff beyond measure. At BDG, we believe that the future of work will be diverse and that people will be truly represented. It will be dispersed because people will be working in more different locations, and it will be aware. We've seen the effect of the BLM movement. People will be very purpose-driven. But the dispersed workforce is going to make it considerably harder to measure wellness in the usual way. Lighting, ergonomics, all those elements that we've been designing and controlling in office environments for the last few years cannot be as controlled in employees' homes. So again, people are going to have to take more ownership of their home working environment to ensure that all the factors that we considered important are maintained at home. And with people spread, then the company culture is the thing that will unite them. So that's why I think the culture is going to be the thing that everybody needs to work hard at in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jill. So after Catherine and Jill have perhaps given us more of an overview of some of the bigger issues, we're now going to go to our next three speakers. Adrian is starting to talk very specifically about ergonomics and some of the issues that Jill raised actually about how we take care of people in the home, and to talk through human scale's experience of COVID. So over to you, Adrian.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. I'll just stand up for my bit. So yeah, thanks, Jill. Obviously, we have sort of slightly slimmer talk tracks, but I'll try and get through some of this information. So I think from the sector point of view, we've obviously seen some very, very big changes in the sector. So a lot of organisations in the UK and in Europe have utilised the furlough scheme to weather the storm during these uncertain times. And that's both on the client side and obviously on the sector side. For us, the traditional projects have changed slightly. So our client base are now looking at, rather than looking at one site with 1,000 employees, it's now 1,000 sites with one employee. And this creates a different set of challenges both for us and the client, because it's a very, very different way of working. And most notably, office equipment becomes home office equipment. And it's a very, very different environment for us. The merits of working from home are debatable. We could talk about that all day. But what is clear is that we won't be returning to traditional offices anytime soon in the future. And working from home shouldn't really be considered temporary. And it has to be contended with. So there's new challenges in terms of health and wellness. Jill mentioned some of those. And really, depending on where you are in the world, a lot of my global clients have very, very different landscapes. So we are supplying, for example, our WellGuard separation panels to reduce the spread of aerosols in offices where people are going back in, and that's something that's selling in vast quantities in some regions, and in other regions it's not quite there yet. So with working from home, where are we at? So about 58% of the US workforce, or about 85 million workers, are currently working from their home. So 50 to 75% is estimated will continue to work from home throughout 2020. And then into 2021, we're probably going to have about 25 to 30% of workers will continue remote work. Well, why is that? I think employee demand before the pandemic was very, very high to work from home. They craved a better work-life balance and the flexibility that it obviously brings. Employers have now fewer concerns about having employees working from home. The biggest fear in the UK was that the broadband network was going to collapse. We wouldn't be able to cope. Video calls are going to be difficult. From my own experience, 2 video calls and 1 homeschooling session, there was a few issues. We were really stretching the bandwidth, but largely technology withstood the challenge. Organizations are going to embrace a working from home culture. They're going to be better prepared for future disasters. So as we've seen, we sort of talked about Hong Kong, this yo-yo effect of lockdown, not, semi-lockdown, unenforced lockdowns. The better prepared we are, then the better the experience is going to be for individuals and the organization. The disaster recovery plans used to be you had a separate building. Well, that doesn't really work with the virus. So we have to have a rapid change in our thinking. And lastly, I think the greatest driver is, working from home cost savings are approximately $11,000 for each employee who works remotely for 50% of the time. This is a big, big driver for organizations to have successful work from home programs. And obviously employees can save in terms of commuting costs, etc. So there's a lot at stake for both the employer and the employee. My main focus is comfort, ergonomics. So how do we manage employee comfort when people are working from home? How do we manage it in their environment? Firstly, let's just define ergonomics. So ergonomics is the science of fitting the task to the worker. And we do that to maximize productivity whilst reducing discomfort, fatigue, and injury. So it's really important that we get that right. The key thing is we don't control the environment anymore. And that's a really big differentiator. So how do we manage that? And this question comes up a lot when we're working with our global clients and partners. Inevitably, it leads to a realization there are a lot of unknown factors at play. So, we really need to get our heads around, as organizations, as ergonomists, as, people working in the industry. It's really, really hard to control that environment. But first thing we need to do is understand what's in that environment. There's immense variability between my house and Anna's house and Catherine's house. Everybody has slightly different tastes and everybody has slightly different, usage. Prolonged laptop usage is obviously a very big factor in sort of discomfort. So what we need to know, and the immediate concerns are employees working at a desk or kitchen counters? Is it a coffee table? Is it their beds? What are employees sitting on? Is it a non-adjustable chair? Is it a stool? Is it a couch? Do they choose their environment based upon how it looks for WebEx? There's big evidence of that. And, we need to make sure that we are taking these things into account. So in summary, there's a lot of factors at play and the organization has to respond. The first thing we need to do is understand what the employee has. So do we just throw money at the problem? No, because will that money get spent in the right areas? That's debatable. We need to make sure that organizations are prescribing what employees have, so we have a standardized approach. If I give somebody $1,000, do they buy a $50 chair? Do they buy a $100 chair? Do you even buy a chair? Maybe you go and get a TV or a new PlayStation. Who knows what employees do? We really need to make sure that we use some sort of ergonomic survey. So we go out and we try and understand what is out there, and we try to fill the gaps where people don't have good ergonomic tools. And then secondly, the thing we do is we educate people in ergonomics. So we need to make sure that we try to make people understand the concepts and make sure that they protect and look after themselves in their homes. That's really key. If we can educate users to a good level, then they will start to look after themselves. They'll start to make sure that they start to take the concepts on. I always say laptops are kind of like tractor beams. So they suck you in. The more intense the work becomes, the worse it becomes. We reach for the keyboard, we reach for the mouse, we reach for the same screen all on the same device. So what we should do is set ourselves up so the monitor is lifted and we use an external keyboard and mouse when we're using a laptop. So the education is kind of twofold. We need to educate employees, but also educate employers to help them understand that they don't need to spend thousands of dollars to make some really quick changes. So just to bring my section to a close, just cover off a couple of misconceptions on social media. There's a lot of information out there in the marketplace. People say, you know, sitting is a new smoking. It's very, very bad for us to sit down for extended periods. We know that. There's a lot of things that, you know, it increases the spine pressure, it reduces enzymes responsible for burning fat. So the opposite view is we stand all the time. I'm standing for this presentation, but standing has a very bad effect as well. So it can be linked to joint pain. It causes varicose veins, pooling of blood in the lower extremities. So we need to have a balance. So let's try and follow the 28 and 2 rule. Let's sit for 20 minutes in a neutral posture. Let's stand for 8 minutes in a neutral posture. And let's spend 2 minutes walking or stretching. And this allows us to make 2 sit-stand transitions per hour. Movement is critical. So let's move around as much as we can, walk around during your calls, take a walk to work. So walk around a block and then come into the office. So just to summarize and finish my piece off, working from home is here to stay in some capacity. Ask your people what they have and fill the gaps to increase the comfort at home. Let's educate users on ergonomics. So, you know, tools such as webinars, self-assessment software, certification courses are all available. And finally, remember to adjust your position as often as you can, but at least 2 times per hour. Anna, I'll hand back to you to introduce the next speaker and thank you for your time.
Unmute myself. Brilliant. Thank you, Adrian. So based on that 28-2, though, we should all be standing up now, shouldn't we? I'm not going to. So we're moving on now to Richard Costin, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Bisley Office Furniture.
Good morning, Anna. Good morning, everybody. What I'd like to be able to do is, from a manufacturing perspective, give the audience a bit of an overview, because it's interesting to hear all the speakers talking about working from home. But as a manufacturer, probably 80% of my staff can't work from home. They have to work in a factory. So what I'm going to try to be able to give you a bit of an overview is a bit of a very brief high-level overview of Bisley and what we do. Some of the purchasing behaviour of our subsidiaries across the globe, and also purchasing behaviour of some of our customers as well, and how we've had to be able to react to the working from home and business change in generally. A bit about innovation and a bit about manufacturing as well. Bisley is an independent, family-owned business, primarily manufacturing steel and wooden storage for the workplace. Started in 1930. And it's got offices in London, Ireland, North America, Spain, France, the Netherlands, and the Middle East. I was fortunate to start with Bisley in the middle of February, 4 weeks before the Secretary of State told the UK to cease any social contact. And then 2 weeks after that, when the Prime Minister told everyone to stay at home. From a manufacturing perspective, when you have 500 people in a factory where they're receiving messages from the NHS to be able to go home, it's a bit of a challenge to what you do. Many of my colleagues have carried on manufacturing. There's no right or there's no wrong way, but we actually decided to close the factory on the 24th of March. And we closed the factory for 8 working days, just to be able to take stock, engage with our subsidiaries, engage with our customers about what they think is going to happen. What was very obvious straight away, because of our subsidiaries across the globe, they started going into lockdown at various stages, and also coming out of lockdown at various stages as well. But one thing was very evident: the large office furniture installations, projects that were due to take place, all went on hold. Some of them sort of released as we came out of lockdown, but the vast majority of very large projects, customers didn't know how to react. They didn't know whether they were going to open their offices. And if they are going to open their offices, what do they have to be able to do to bring their staff back to the UK, back into the office? So on the 6th of April, we opened our factory, reopened it, but we only brought back a third of our staff. And we started remanufacturing the product. Whilst we were on lockdown, we still continued to receive orders. But the orders that we were receiving, there was no change. It was standard product, No change. We wasn't asked about, do you do anything to be able to stop the bacteria? Do you do any sort of storage that you could do sort of something slightly different for the workplace? Every order we received was for standard steel and wooden storage. So whilst we were there, we were talking to our subsidiaries. Vast majority of the business at Bisley's do is all through our trade partners, through our supply partners. But we also have a little Bisley online shop as well. And that's really for the consumer, if they would want to come on with various different types of products. And literally overnight, the volume of the shop tripled in volume for people actually working from home. These were not coming through from the trade. These weren't coming through from corporate customers. This was all consumer work. And these were products as steel storage, some seating, some desking, but this was all for the home. And there's a vast range of different colors that were being ordered. So to talk about our subsidiaries and the impact across the globe, the UK and Ireland initially declined in volume by between 30 and 40%. And we saw a higher focus on working from home, still storage, but also from our customers wanting to be able to move away from general storage, but also personal storage. So people were always looking to order lockers for their office and pedestals for their office, but they wanted to be able to look at it and maybe sort of do something slightly different with technology. Catherine mentioned earlier about touch of the workplace. Our subsidiaries started to be able to ask questions regarding, can we actually provide for various paint or a finish for the products that we manufacture that would actually stop the spread of bacteria? So we started to be able to look into that, and we found it. We diversified. We found different products and different powder plates and different mechanisms that we could start to promote to our customer base to be able to reassure them when they do bring their staff back to the office, the products that we supply will be safe for them to be able to bring their staff back in. So the UK started to be able to materially improve for home office. Germany didn't actually stop from our perspective. Our office continued to open, where the UK and other offices around the globe was a roughly 30% down in reduction. Germany were only at 8% down. They continued to supply and continue to order. And Spain and the Netherlands and France are very project driven, and their business literally halved overnight, purely because it's a large office project. The US, again, they started going to lockdown at different times, and the large projects decided to go on hold. But the US retail marketplace, where they sell to the domestic, to the consumer, their volumes again quadrupled to where they were before, purely supplying furniture for them to be able to sell to the consumer. So the Middle East, again, their marketplace drastically declined. So because of that decline, and because we have over 500 people working in a factory, what do we have to be able to do something different? So we diversified. We diversified into a shop. We diversified into producing a new ranges of furniture, which is back for the home, return for the home, and return for the office as well. So we've been extremely busy trying to promote back through to our supply chain partners what we can do and what we can do differently. We're starting to see in the UK and overseas more volume coming back. And over the period of time, as everyone knows, when you're on furlough, it's demoralizing. It's very, very difficult for our staff. So, and a lot of them can't work from home. So we started to phase people back to work. And now we have over 2/3 of our factory back up and running, manufacturing, albeit less than it was before. But we're manufacturing over £850,000 of steel and wooden product every week, which ship to the UK and overseas. Anna.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Richard. That's a really interesting overview of sort of the different way the world has reacted, but good to see that things are coming back. So now we're moving now, last but definitely not least, David Clements, who is Chief Executive of Future Designs, to talk about some of the lighting solutions and some of the amazing innovations coming out of that sector that are going to support businesses getting back to the office. Are you there, David?
I am. Good day, everybody. Can people hear me? Yes. Good. Future Designs, we were formed 29 years ago as a lighting manufacturer, and 28 years on, we never dreamed of what's happened over the last 6-8 months. But that said, we have to adapt, as we've heard every different business talk this morning is adapting in one way or another. Interestingly, as a manufacturer, we never shut down. We've been open when our Prime Minister shut us down on the 23rd of March. Our factory stayed open, and the dynamic of that was immensely difficult because, as Richard pointed out, our factory staff said, well, we don't want to come to work because the office staff aren't. It was all of our office staff were shipped home with computers, laptops, at huge expense to the business. And we proved you can work from home to a point. But the factory had to carry on, and we're now back to 100% of our workforce is back in the factory, and 100% of our workforce is back in our offices. We've had to do a lot of work to work that, but I was determined to get us back to work. So that's what I did, and I felt that was my duty to make sure my staff are okay when they're back at work, and which they are. There are 3 things I'm going to talk about quite briefly. I know you've been listening for quite some time, so I'll get through this as quick as I can. The role of lighting in offices in general. Well, generally, as you know, as I sit here now in a dungeon up in Clerkenwell, about 50 yards from Richard, strangely enough, we on different sides of a building. But it's illuminated to the correct effect for me to present to you. One of the most important things we're going to experience, in my belief, is that over the next year, 2 years, offices will become populated correctly again, but people will not be max packed in. Catherine was saying earlier in Hong Kong, where people are working very close proximity, a little bit like here in Canary Wharf now, where the space between people is 1.2, 1.3 meters. My personal view is that will become 2 meters minimum. People will not accept being crushed in. But having said that, I believe that the workplace will be open longer. And by that, you might be seeing people going into offices as traders do at 6 in the morning, and you might still be at an office at 10 at night if it suits your particular circumstance. And to assist that the advent of LED 10 years ago allowed us to change the tune and the color tone of the lighting we work under. And without going into massive detail on this, basically your body's circadian rhythm, you wake up at say 6 o'clock in the morning, and the light that comes through from the sun as it's rising is somewhat yellow. And as the day progresses, it gets whiter and bluer and goes back into a more warmer yellow color as the day goes on. We can mimic that through office lighting and home lighting. And within our factory where we double shift, the night workers prefer to work under daylight tone of lighting, not because they produce any more product or are more efficient, it makes them feel better. And this is going to be a massive plus as we go forward and adapt to the world that's not going to be the same, but offices will definitely go back to work, is my belief. And that's part of this 24/7 office and how it can develop. The thing we have to remember is that as much as some people are comfortable at home, the chief executive of Schroder Bank on Saturday said all his workers can work from home forever. Well, a round of applause for the most stupid comment I've heard. There are people who actually, their work is their solace. Going to work to get away from their bedsit, going to work to get away from perhaps part of a family that they live with that they don't really want to be with but are locked in. We're not all fortunate enough to have a house with its own office. I have one. I don't use it. I go into my places of work. But there's a lot of things to consider rather than just let's all work from home. How do we mentor a new graduate who's joined you in September? And how do we teach them social skills of how to behave, how to shake hands, how to present themselves, how to go to the pub after work and have a beer and behave themselves? All the things we've the oldest man in the room here, has learned from other people. You won't learn that sitting in your bedsit or in your house in Hampshire. I trust you. So finally, on a very positive note, we stumbled across UVC lighting back in February when we were reading documents that were coming out of the Far East. UVC lighting has been used for 40 years to purify water. It's used in water purification and air purification. The United States use it in healthcare a huge amount. And we have, as a business, have spent the last 5 months developing products that we can fit into office space, into elevators, into restrooms, into homes, where we can kill bacterial microorganisms on surfaces. So whilst this is not a one sort fits all, the duty of care of us as employers and the major blue chip employers to care for our staff, this will prove to be a massive growth area over the next year. A bit like Richard was mentioning, they were looking into paint and what have you. We're all going to have to look at how we do things just differently to protect the people who we're responsible for. And really that sort of brings my part to an end. But I'd like to thank all of you that have listened, those on the panel, Anna for bolting the presentation together. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, David. It's not over yet. There's questions coming in, so you might have some more. We have got a question that's come through, actually. So I'm going to read it out, and please tell me if you'd like to respond. And if nobody decides they're going to answer, I'll pick someone. So I apologise if I'm not pronouncing this name properly, actually, but it's Nitin Lahoti, who's based in India. And the question is, how is the spread of the virus being checked in a workplace, given the asymptomatic nature of COVID cases? Now, I would imagine this varies from business to business and country to country in terms of rules and regulations, but I don't know if anybody has a particular opinion on it or has experience of how some businesses are planning to move forward.
Anna, I can just cover a brief bit of this from a manufacturing perspective. We have sort of 300 people every day coming to a factory. They do 2 shifts, morning and afternoon. Every employee that comes in within the company handbook, they're told and briefed exactly what they have to do and the behaviours with the 2 metre distancing rule. Every employee gets temperature checked every morning when they come in. Hand sanitizers are based throughout the factory and throughout the office space. There's documentation, there's signage everywhere. Any member of staff that feels unwell or has a temperature at home, or their family member is poorly for whichever way, we ask them to quarantine. We minimise anybody coming into the office or factory. When we've got screens within the factory to separate welding machines from press machines to paint machines. We've reduced the number of people in the factory so people feel safe. When they first came back in April, we did an induction and we trained people. We asked people to sign to say that they fully understand what that they have to adhere to. And so far, I'm delighted that the behaviour of every member of staff in Bisley, whether that's in the showroom, the office or the factory, have behaved impeccably.
Great, thank you, Richard. Does anybody have anything to add to that from their own personal experience?
I add sort of what we're doing. Sorry, I can add what we're doing for our clients is that we are sort of looking at layouts and very clearly either physically removing furniture so people are spaced, or making sure that those desks are sort of unusable, so putting tape or signage on it. So there is a lot of effort going into actually making people stay apart, and also the use of masks in offices as well. So most of our clients are saying if you're at your desk, then you don't have to wear a mask, but if you're moving around, then you put your mask on.
Anyone else have anything to add to that answer?
Echo what Richard said. So we've got 3 manufacturing facilities around the globe. We've got Nogales in Mexico, we've got Piscataway in New Jersey, and we've got Dublin in Ireland. And it's been, we've been lucky enough not to close any of those facilities, but it's things like regular deep cleaning. I think Richard mentioned, shift work. We have to make sure that we balance it, and we set this up for success. We have to make sure there's temperature checks. For our clients, I did mention very briefly the WellGuard separation panels. So in some parts of the world, people are going back to, higher density offices, and they want a way to separate people at their desks. Maybe not even at their desk, maybe it's a queuing system and they have barriers. You start to see these in retail locations as well. So there's a demand for trying to get back to where we were, which is going to take a long time, I think. But where we can't, I think there's still a demand to separate people with some sort of panel to reduce the spread.
Thank you, Adrian. We have another question here actually, but it may overlap with some of the things you guys have said. I might be coming back to you, Adrian and Jill again. Gary Crispin JD has said, when acquiring or designing new offices, what are the considerations in adopting flexibility from a minimum and maximum seat density, and also looking at ergonomics without having to spend money on renovation over time to accept the 100% of the workforce again? So I'm guessing this question really, it's about creating a future-proof work environment so we can deal with this inevitable flexing of scale. But given that we've got on our 3rd wave in Hong Kong, and I'm sure we're going to have a second in the UK and the rest of the world too, how do we design to accommodate these varying needs? I don't know if you want to take that one, Jill.
I think the first element is to understand what the balance is for your organisation between remote working and office working. So I know that there are lots of companies, David already mentioned Schroders, that says everyone is always going to work from home now. The reality is that, it won't be for most companies 100% remote working. But looking at those numbers and how many you expect to be in on each day will enable you to kind of reduce the number of desks that you're providing. And the minimum and the maximum, I mean, we're looking currently basing it on 2 meter social distancing. That may well be reduced to 1 meter going forward as a vaccine is found. So, but I think David's right. We're not expecting to go back to some of the sort of very intense densities that we've seen previously. But agile working and activity-based working, does enable people to, home working is part of that mix. So once a vaccine comes in, we will, I believe, lockdown will have enhanced the uptake of agile working. And so it's not necessarily something new, but it is kind of a wider acceptance of the fact that, you can be agile in the workplace, and that will include home working.
Thank you, Jill. Catherine, did you have anything to add on that point as well?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point that Jill raised. I agree with that. And I think a lot of it can also depend on what phase of the design or the office is at. So for example, we are now designing for clients new projects. So if they're already adapting the agile working, it's much easier for them because they're working in a shared ratio anyway. not everyone is in the office. So that's a pretty easy win for them because they're already adopting that policy. Other clients who don't really work in a share ratio because it just doesn't work for them, adopting all the other measures that we talked about, increasing the distancing between desks, increasing focus areas. What they're doing is still adapting the work from home. So they'll be working in teams, for example. So one week, team A goes in, team B goes in the other week. So even though they can't be agile, it's just more the way they're actually using the office as well. And then you get the companies, the clients who aren't moving necessarily, but they're coming to us saying, what can we do? Okay, we need to actually make some changes in the workplace. And we provide them solutions that are very quick wins, like hand sanitizers, that's a no-brainer. Introducing the mobile screens in between desks. And if there's anything that we can do to move furniture around slightly, which we actually have done for a company here in Hong Kong, and making it cost effective for them, but also it obviously can't be a permanent solution. Because even though COVID is temporary, they do think also, like everyone said here, one day everyone is going to come back to work. And so they've got that in play, but also they're working in teams as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Thank you. So I know we're getting close to our time, but I have just got another question actually that sort of tries to conclude what everybody's saying is firstly that the office is critical to business to develop cultures and keep the future of commerce running. But what I like about COVID, and there aren't many wonderful things about it, but one of them is I think it has forced businesses to take a really good look at how they're structured and how they manage people, and some sort of quite philosophical questions, because post-COVID I suspect that businesses are going to be judged on how they have behaved, and that's right. I also think that the world is full of lots and lots of clever people, and it's our decision to decide what kind of world we want to live in, really. And a big part of that is to do with our workspace. And I'm sure that there are more innovative solutions to come to make this manageable. So life doesn't have to be a life of lockdown. It should be one of flexibility and choice and understanding the risks. And we can go back to deciding our own risk levels rather than government deciding for us. And I hope that happens. But just to sum up, so that's my little thing about COVID. But
could I just say something on that, Anna? Would you mind?
No, not at all, please.
Only a couple of minutes. Most of you know me on here, and I can be somewhat contentious. But I want to question that employers are being fair to their employees. I really don't think the major employers are, because I think people working from home, there's a massive number and percentage who are actually struggling mentally and emotionally because they're being told you work from home. And it's the same as schools. You have to balance in the end whether this virus and the damage it's doing to in killing people, to the damage we're doing to children who are living at home, where again school is their solace, it is their place to get away from some awful things that go on. So I don't think we can just say that the major employers are doing their employees good by saying work from home. I think they're neglecting them in some respects, and the dark side of this has to be looked at as much as aren't we good because we're saying you can work from home and we've created a laptop and a chair that suits you. There are deeper issues than this, and that's why we have to get a balance back of people getting out of their homes, and some of their homes are not places you want to spend your time in, and the same with school children. It's exactly the same issue. We have to get people back to some sense of normality, not 100% of 5 days a week, but definitely 75 to 80%, and that's my view. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, it's okay. I agree with you. I think we have to get back to having all the facts and information to be able to decide some of these things for ourselves. And just because people are out of sight, they shouldn't be out of mind if they're in their homes. Does anybody on the panel have anything to add about some good lessons that have been learned during COVID, or things that are there's a lot that's going to stay with us for a long time, but any particular sort of legacy lessons?
don't think I've ever eaten better. Seem to have rediscovered cooking and put a bit of weight on, which isn't a good thing, but that gives me something to aim for the rest of the year. But yeah, I think it's brought a little bit more balance. You know, there's not a commute, there's not a lot of travel at the moment, a lot more virtual work, and that's meant I've managed to reconnect with my taste buds, which I think has been positive. But yeah, that's the only, I guess. Unfortunately, I've also reconnected with wine and all those things as well. But that's I'm sure everybody shares that a little bit. But yeah, I think it's just good that, you know, it could have been a lot worse, and I know that it has been very, very serious for a lot of countries. You know, it has been very, very bad. But I'm just hoping that we know a bit more now to be able to tackle it and keep our employees and colleagues safe as we move forward.
I believe that it'll prove in the long term that people will realise that going to work can be quite pleasurable, and everything that's around it, whether it's at 5 o'clock and going and having a quick pint on the way home, seeing your friends. It's like sitting on this call now. It's all well and good, but it's completely sanitized, and we'll switch off, and none of us will get together and just talk round the corner quickly about what was said. It's gone, it's finished. And I think that the plus of it will show that we actually want to go back to collaborating personally, and the reality of that.
Hope so.
Yeah, I would. I know it's not quite the question that you asked, Anna, but I would add to that. You know, what I've learned about this time is that, you know, I hate home working. For me personally, it doesn't work. I like getting out of the house. I don't mind the commute. I like being with people, and I like the variety that it brings. And that's what sort of where I get my inspiration from the people that I meet, from the different things. You know, I am fortunate. I have a lovely home. I have my home office. Everything is there. But after 20 minutes in there, I'm done. I can't want to be out and talking to people. But I've also seen it from the younger generation as well. You know, I have a teenage daughter who has been very affected by this. And, you know, if I say to her, well, you know, the future is home working, it's like, you know, so she's a teenager, she's ready to get out there and explore the world. But, you know, at one time there was talk that universities will be online and you can work from home, you can stay at home and do that. And then your first job, you know, you'll go in for some training and then you'll be working from home. It doesn't suit, in my opinion, the majority of people to do it 100%. Yes, there's always times when it's easier to work from home, but I think that, you know, the human race, we thrive on interaction, and I think that offices are where the magic happens. You know, we can all do our work at home, but actually, you know, I think we have to find a way forward, and, you know, as soon as there's a vaccine, to get back and re-energize and reset.
Yeah, thank you, Jill.
Yeah.
I've actually have another question through that we've been given an extra 3 minutes to answer it. So it's from, I have to apologise if I've got the pronunciation of this name incorrect. It's Rizwan Hamid Butt from Pakistan. And he said, hi panel, my question is how to deal with cultural norms and social practices while addressing wellness at work. We've often experienced that, particularly in third world countries, diversity of culture and social norms is sometimes very critical when setting behavioural standards. And I guess this is a really important point because we are talking this very, very UK and Hong Kong developed world conversation in lots of ways, but there are people have, you know, tougher problems than we do. I don't know if anybody is experienced in taking that. I'm hoping, Catherine, that you may be closer to some of the issues that he's described. If you want me to repeat it.
No, I think that's fine.
Okay.
Obviously, I can't really speak for what's happening over sort of in India and other parts of Asia. But the cultural difference definitely comes in play, especially somewhere like Hong Kong, because it is we have a lot of expats here, and the expats cover all different ranges, say Europe, Australia, England, for example. And I think sort of adopting to different cultures in the workplace. First of all, it's very important for expats to come into a place like Hong Kong or Asia, anywhere, and be very open to how the locals are. And for example, I am more used to having my own personal space, but in Hong Kong, they're just like, they're here, and it absolutely annoys me, but it's just, they're not trying to be rude, it's just culturally, they're fine with a smaller kind of a space in general. Now, of course, with COVID, they're learning to actually keep your distance, but even so, it's not a big thing for them. It's something they're not used to, because once again, like I said, in the homes, they're used to these kind of compact environments. So it's really, for me, the best way I can answer it, it's really understanding the culture that you're living in and respecting that. And then they kind of see how, say, like people from the West, like how we live. And it's really just marrying these two different cultures in the workplace. And then when it comes to the workplace, it's really like what Jill said before, it's about the company culture and instilling a good culture that's actually open and diverse for any culture or race. So I think a lot of that in the workplace is really managed by the actual company itself, I think.
Great, thank you. And I need to end on that note, I'm afraid. Thank you all so much for joining in and partaking in this. It's been really interesting. I've got loads of notes that I will write up and share with everybody, actually, because there was some really brilliant stuff that came out of today, and conversations that I hope we'll be able to have again in the future. Thank you, everybody, and back to you, Buzz.